Have you ever thought about doing a speech or speaking live on a platform at 6 p.m., right? All the days leading to that day, Tejo and Apendula and other people can attest to this. If you know that you have to stand in front of a crowd or an online crowd, right? You tend to think about it and it can worry you, right? It hasn't happened yet, but you get to feel all sorts of feelings. Some people feel nervous, some people feel excited, but a lot of people feel very, very anxious to the point of wanting to avoid the situation altogether, right? So anxiety is feeling stressed in the present about something that might happen in the future, whether it's real or imagined. It's having a reaction in the present about a stressor, a threat, a demand that might happen in the future. And then you start feeling these things. So we call it an anxiety disorder when you have an irrational fear over things. You start getting overwhelmed by anxiety over things that do not really make sense, but they are causing a reaction of something that might be real, right? So anxiety is just worrying about the future. Or worry daily is just, it's about the future, right? You worry about tomorrow, you worry about your marks, you worry about whether people love you, you worry about whether you have enough money. So that is anxiety. And sometimes you worry about situations that may never happen. I had a client who is 12 years old. He said his fear is an earthquake or being under an earthquake. Even after he learned that there are very few chances of earthquake happening in South Africa, but he still has that as a fear. So that's anxiety, right? Where even with information, even with knowledge and facts, you still brought to that fact. So we can speak about how to overcome the fear of public speaking. We call it performance anxiety, where people also struggle with having to undergo situations that are stressful, but then it becomes overwhelming. I hope this makes sense. Guys, if you have any questions, please write them on the chat, and then we'll answer all the questions when I'm able to open the chat. Okay, so then we spoke about stress, spoke about anxiety. Then what is panic, right? Panic is an overwhelming feeling of fear that triggers physical reaction, right? Similar to anxiety, panic is a reaction to threat. When you are feeling, when your body is meant to pick up on threats in the environment, right? These are what we call survival mechanisms. When our body perceives that something's going to happen, we either run away from it, we call that the flight response, we run towards it, meaning the fight response, and then there's also the freeze response. Panic is part of the freeze response. It's the body deciding to shut down due to perceiving a stressful environment. So for instance, if you are scared of your parent coming and punishing you, right? If you're scared of failing, for instance, and you've already written the exam and they've already taken your script and you can't take it back, and you then realize that you've made so many mistakes, you dread the day that the results come out, right? And oftentimes it leads to a physical reaction, right? Whereas with anxiety, it's more cognitive, and we'll talk a bit about that, meaning thought processes. But with panic, you have a physical response where you have shallow breathing, you struggle to breathe like, and then you feel asphyxiated or almost like you're about to suffocate or choke. You have a rapid heartbeat, where your heart beats fast. Your hands might be sweaty or clammy, and then you might feel dizzy where you can't see straight. And in the worst case scenario, people actually also collapse during a panic attack. Sometimes panic attacks can be spontaneous, where you're just sitting and then you're overwhelmed by this thing, or others have a trigger. The most common one is when you are about to engage in a fight, or you just have a fight and then you just feel like crying, you feel like sitting down, you feel like walking away, you feel like you're having a heart attack, right? This is your body trying to shut down in the response that the stressor or the threat might go away. Now, all of these are reactions to stress and anxiety. Now, fear, stress, terror, worry, anxiety are all interchanging words, or words that could be used interchangeably to kind of explain what we are feeling, or how we are feeling, right? We cannot sometimes predict when you might feel this, because your body reacts to it in different ways. So some situations makes us feel stressed, right? Where you're feeling the pressure of the thing. Some would make us want to run away, right? And with males, oftentimes fear shows up as anger, right? Because anger is more the socially acceptable thing. So you're always frustrated. You always want to punch someone. You always feel like you have to shut someone down so that they don't shut you down, right? Terror, where you feel more scared, nightmares, and all those things. We already spoke about panic, worry, and anxiety at the same time. I hope you guys are following. Are we still together?
I'm here. I don't know about everybody else.
Yes, yes.
We still
okay.
here.
Any questions so far? Any questions so far? Are we still good? Okay, thank you, Makati. Thank you, Makaka. Let me continue then. So, okay. So now we want to talk about symptoms, right? And this is in no way a diagnosis, right? You can list these things if you have them. But what I want to say is, if we look into our whole lives, then you probably have experienced all of these things that I've mentioned here. So what I need you to do, if you'd want to do some self-analysis or introspection, I want you to just look at how you've been feeling in the last week or 2 weeks, right? That will be more accurate than if you say, I felt like that once, I felt like that one, and then we tell you all of the things and you're like, I'm definitely anxious, I'm definitely stressed, and things like that. So, but we will talk about that if you feel like you've noticed certain things about yourself. So, in psychology, we look into the impact of stress, and then we've been able to separate it into 4 different things. So cognitive, meaning thought processes; behavioral, meaning things that we actively do; emotional means how we feel; and physiological. Excuse the typo here. I meant physiological, and it will show up in the other slides as well. Now, cognitive. So cognitive has to do with how we think. When people are anxious, stressed, panic, they're more likely to be worrying constantly, right? Worrying is always just asking questions about things going wrong. It's not just brainstorming. It's like, what if this happens? Yes, a lot of what ifs. And those what ifs are what we call catastrophizing, where you're thinking about the worst case scenario, racing thoughts, where you just go and your thoughts just go and go. And now you have a lot of floods of thoughts from different voices, sometimes in our head, when we're just thinking about certain things, and it goes on in a loop. And because our minds are racing in this way, we can tend to be forgetful and disorganized, meaning we then fail to focus, and because of that, we are unable to meet certain goals that require focus and concentration, right? You end up forgetting things. As young people, I don't know if you've experienced this. You say you forgot something as a young person, and an older person like your parents, like, hey, what are you thinking? Eh? Who are you thinking actually? Who are you thinking about? Who's on your mind so much that you are so distracted? Anyway, gotta love our parents. Anyway, inability to focus. So that means being distracted, where your mind just wanders. You're trying to study, but these thoughts just come and they permeate, meaning come and disrupt whatever thing that you're trying to do, and then it takes longer for you to do it. Being pessimistic, meaning being negative about the outcome of events and only seeing the negative side, right? You always see, you don't just see the glass half empty. You say there is no glass whatsoever. Anyway, that's a therapy joke. And then with behavioral symptoms of stress and anxiety, you see changes in appetite, whether you're now starting to eat quite a lot or you're not eating at all, skipping meals, not feeling like eating, even when your body is like panging in your stomach, right? But you just not into it, right? You'd rather do something else, or you'd rather eat sweets instead of having like a proper meal. And this would go on for days, right? Or you're always craving things that are sugary or that have salt, and it's unusual, right? Okay. There's a question from Gisetto. We'll talk a bit about that. Thank you, guys. Let's keep writing questions and things like that. And then procrastinating and avoiding responsibilities. Procrastinating is putting off work that you're supposed to do. Like you're supposed to do your project. Instead of doing your project, you're doing other things until you don't have enough time to do your project. The next thing you're typing fast there, it's 10 to 12, the thing needs to be submitted by 12 o'clock, and then it's almost load shedding, and then it's a mess, right? Anyway, let me not trigger us. Moving right along, you see yourself now engaging in alcohol, drugs, and other things. And this is not just for fun, but just to cope, right? And then nervous behaviors like nail biting, fidgeting, pacing. You're always having these weird quirks nowadays because you're anxious. Pimple popping can be added there. Like ferociously, you're always like doing something, right? And isolating or avoiding others can also be a behavioral shift. Moving on to emotional. Emotional symptoms are what we feel, right, as a result of being stressed. This is becoming easily agitated, frustrated, and moody. Like when you just go from 0 to 100 real quick, right? And sometimes you don't know where it's coming from. You might get feedback from people like, what's going on? You also can't really tell. Or like, yeah, like every day, all the time. Feeling overwhelmed, like you're losing control or you need to take control, right? Anxiety often does that. Anxiety is almost like the fear of losing control. So whenever you can't control certain things, whenever someone can just stand you up for 5 minutes and you're done, right? And those type of things. Having difficulty in relaxing and quieting your mind. You go on vacation, you go on weekends, and your mind is still on thinking about work, thinking about what they did to you and all of those things, right? Everything that you try to do to make you feel better is ineffective because you're always thinking about that and you can't seem to relax. And then feeling bad about yourself, having low self-esteem, loneliness, worthlessness, and feeling depressed, right? So that can also come as a reaction to stress and anxiety.